But the interesting thing is, having been in-house my entire career, the companies that I've worked at, because they're all tech companies, we
Mhm.
had an absurd amount of engineers. And the vast majority of them were here under visa sponsorships. So
Right.
there is this disproportionate treatment given to, engineers or lawyers, right?
Yeah.
Somehow they can get visas and lawyers can't.
The Abstract is brought to you by SpotDraft, an end-to-end contract lifecycle management system that helps high-performing legal teams become 10 times more efficient. If you spend hours every week drafting and reviewing contracts, worrying about being blindsided by renewals, or if you just want to streamline your contracting processes, SpotDraft is the right solution for you. From creating and managing templates and workflows, to tracking approvals, e-signing, and reporting via an AI-powered repository, SpotDraft helps you in every stage of your contracting. And because it should work where you work, it integrates with all the tools your business already uses. SpotDraft is the key that unlocks the potential of your legal team. Make your contracting easier today at SpotDraft.com. If you're a foreign-trained lawyer who wants to move to the U.S., how do you find a job? Why should companies look to foreign-trained lawyers in an increasingly globalized world? And how should you navigate moments of big career transitions? Today, we are joined by my friend, Flavia Naves, for this episode of The Abstract. She was most recently the general counsel of Circle and is an authority on all things law and regulation of crypto, fintech, and payments. She remains involved in the industry as a commissioner on Wyoming's stable token commission, I should say, and as of counsel at the Wyoming-based law firm of Hathaway and Kunz. But today we are going to be chatting about issues that are a little bit closer to Flavia's heart than digital assets. Flavia, welcome to The Abstract.
Well, thank you, Tyler. It is a pleasure to be here and to be talking about something that is, to your point, a lot closer to my heart, because a lot of people know me about, digital assets and financial services regulation, but not that many know that I'm a foreign trained attorney. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. First question for you would be, you studied law in Brazil. When did you decide that you wanted to move to the U.S. and pursue a career here?
Yeah, so my story actually dates back to 1991. So before the year 2000, yes, the olden days. I lived in this small town in Pennsylvania called Hazleton, and I was an exchange student. I lived with a host family, and that experience really just sparked my desire to live in the U.S. and to advance cultural exchange. Mm-hmm. So, I talked to my dad back in Brazil, and he's like, nope, I want you to come back home. My family just wanted me back home after a year in the U.S. I went back to Brazil. I went to law school. As you may know, law school in Brazil, as in many other countries, it is after high school, is at college level. So I did that for 5 years. I got my LLB, which is the bachelor's in law degree. And I kept on visiting my host family in Hazleton in the summers. And then I eventually decided that I wanted to pursue an LLM. That was in 1999.
Did you find it, as you were moving here, did you find it hard to break into the job market after getting that LLM? What are the different sort of hurdles that folks face as they're trying to break into the U.S. job market for lawyers?
Yeah. It was absolutely very difficult. Us lawyers are a pretty pretentious crowd. We like to talk about tiers and law school and moot court and cum laude and all those kind of pretty things that put a star next to your name. That makes us feel pretty important, right? So when you come from a law school that no one ever heard about, right? With a name that is easily mispronounced, like mine, and with a funny accent, right? Employers have no idea what to do with you. Right. And that's what I received. Right. Even though I had practiced law a little bit in Brazil before coming here, prospective employers were looking at me as if I had just graduated from law school. right? And they put me in the same bucket as someone that went to college and law school and had no experience, right? So when you're before an employer, you think about this. You have two resumes, right? One for looks pretty standard, has a
Sure.
law school, a university they recognize, a degree that makes sense to you, and has all the fancy things next to it. The other one has a university spelled in a different language, right? A degree that
Yeah.
you never heard about,
Right.
and those stars are just a little bit different than the ones that right? They shine differently. So the natural inclination of human beings is to obviously go with what you know and makes you comfortable,
Yeah.
right? So that during that process, foreign trained attorneys are at an immense disadvantage.
Just the recruitment piece. Let's say that I am a foreign trained attorney. I'm trying to move to New York City and get a job in the legal market. What are some very practical tips that you might have so that way I can get past that hurdle of resume review and check?
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing for us to remember for insurance attorneys is that, our weakness is actually our biggest strength. Well, our difference is our biggest strength, not our weakness, right? So the natural inclination is to come here and try to blend in. I want to be a corporate associate just like somebody else is. I want to get the job in that big law firm just like somebody else is getting that, because, that's what we want to do, right? We want to be just like everyone else and we want to be part of the cool kids, right? And that's just how it is. So we approach job hunting, networking, marketing the same way that JD student does. And it's the biggest mistake that we make. And I made that mistake. Right? I made the exact same mistake. I came in here and I wanted everyone to see me the same way that they saw everyone else. And it wasn't until I realized that difference that I had is what made me stronger. It made me more marketable than the other JD that was sitting right next to me. Right? So what I did is I said, okay, well, I have this language that others don't speak. I have this degree and a bridge between the Brazilian legal system and the US legal system that others don't have. So, how do I target employers for that? So I started looking, for jobs in which they needed Portuguese fluency or companies that had offices in Brazil and the US and they did business in Brazil and in the US, right? And when I found those, that's when the opportunities started coming through. And, I really focused on that difference as my strength for the first 10 years of my career, right? Because that's when I'm kind of becoming stronger in my skill. And once I'm bona fide, I mean, someone I have a stamp of approval, well, she has been here for over 10 years, she can do this, then it doesn't matter anymore. Right? Such that I talk to some folks at times and they're like, wait a second, you went to law school in Brazil? I had no idea about that. It doesn't matter anymore. But in the beginning, it mattered a lot, right? And, so that's where you really need to play on that strength.
I think it's so important that there are folks like you out there that have had really tremendous success in even particular verticals, right? Of the legal industry, in your case, digital assets, which we've talked about, and fintech, because it paves the way for others. And my next question is that, the way that we actually started talking about this idea for a podcast and for an episode was because I spoke to one of your mentees, someone who is a foreign trained lawyer in the Philippines, had amazing things to say about you. I mean, I'd known you before, but had amazing things to say about you and the way that you'd mentored him, and then helped him. I guess it's sort of a two-part question, right? Like, did you have any mentors early in your career that really helped you? And how do you think that young lawyers should go about finding that type of mentorship?
Yeah. So unfortunately, I didn't have any, right? So I got my LLM in
honest answer, which is good.
right?
Yeah.
That was 2000. And I'm in central Pennsylvania because I went to law school in Harrisburg. So, there were not that many foreign trained attorneys hanging around, that area. So
Yeah.
there wasn't really anyone to serve as that kind of guide and advisor. And then I moved to San Francisco in 2005. And I
Mhm.
had to rebuild my network because now I don't know, the lawyers here. So I have to get to know people. So it was really learning on my own, right? Knocking on doors, networking, getting
Mhm.
numerous rejections, right?
Mhm.
And just persevering until I really got what I wanted. But I think, that kind of lack of support in my career
Mhm.
really, really putting me this kind of duty to give back,
Yeah.
right? There's no reason why other foreign trained attorneys have to go through the same challenges that I did. Absolutely not. So, my mentees bring me a lot of joy. They teach me as much as I teach them, and I hope that some of the bits of guidance that I give them are helpful. But I would tell folks that if you're looking for someone to be your mentor and you are a foreign trained attorney, try to look for someone that comes from your region or your country, because there could be specific um, areas of the law that are particular to that country that have a strength in the United States, right? For
Right.
example, for Brazil is a lot of fintech, right? There's a lot of correlation between payments in Brazil and the United States. So I actually went into that area of the law because I found my path. But there could be that you're dealing with someone that is, in an Asian country where there's a lot of import and export. So potentially that area of the law is something that is going to be a stronger strength because you're going to have a company in that country that is trying to import or export into the United States. So look for someone that shares a similar background than you do. But I would say that, if you don't identify someone that has a similar background, just being foreign trained and understanding what it takes to break into this market, it's just having that resource is invaluable.
We've talked a little bit about, or you've talked a little bit about the perception of risk that exists around foreign trained attorneys. And I use the word perception very specifically, right? Perception, not necessarily a reality.
Yeah.
Why do you think that companies should consider foreign trained attorneys? Why do you think more companies should have given you a chance earlier on in your career?
Yeah, so the breadth of knowledge and expertise and just global understanding the foreign trained attorneys have is very different than attorneys that are here in the US. The attorneys that
Mhm.
come to the US to practice here will likely have practiced in their country before they came, which means that they likely interacted in international transactions. They have done business with the United States from their home country, and they're now coming here to gather additional knowledge to be able to further bridge that gap. They would
Uh-huh.
definitely bring an expertise that recent graduates do not have. Recent graduates, many of them are directly from college into law school. They are eternal students, right? They went to high school, then college, then law school. They may have interned during their summers, but they haven't really work as a lawyer, right? So you're
Mhm.
going to have someone that already brings that global expertise and is able to augment your practice in a way that a recent graduate wouldn't. I think the thing around risks is just the fear of the unknown. And there's
Uh-huh.
really no unknown because all of
Mhm.
these attorneys are going to be barred in the United States as just somebody else is, right? Everyone is taking the bar exam in their respective states
Mhm.
and passing those bar exams. So if you believe that someone that went to a law school in the US passed the bar and that foreign attorney also passed the bar, they should be both qualified to practice law in this country, right? That's what the Supreme Court
Mhm.
of the respective states said they would. So there is
Yep.
that. The other thing I think that plays at times is just the laziness of visa sponsorship, and it's just that, right?
Hmm.
A lot of these foreign trained attorneys require support for their visa status, so the employer would need to sponsor them into a working visa in the United States. And some of them
Mhm.
said, you know what? Too much work for me. I have somebody else that went here, is a US citizen or a green card holder. I don't have to do any of that. I can just put that
Uh-huh.
person in my pocket and go with it. But the interesting thing is, having been in house my entire career, the companies that I've worked at, because they're all tech companies, we
Mhm.
had an absurd amount of engineers. And the vast majority of them were here under visa sponsorships. So
Right.
there is this disproportionate treatment given to, engineers or lawyers, right?
Yeah.
Somehow they can get visas and lawyers can. I think it's just, I go back to what I said earlier. This is a very pretentious position, and people are like, I'm here, so I want to be good and all of it. And it really doesn't open the door for that diversity that you need in the profession. If everyone looks the same, behaves the same, talks the same,
Right.
what good are we bringing to the legal practice?
Let me ask you a follow-up on that, which is maybe you can break down for the audience, because they might not all be familiar with what an LLM really is, and also whether or not you think all LLMs are created equal, right? Or whether or not that's actually something that should really be assessed as you're assessing foreign trained lawyers.
Yeah, so they are definitely not created equally, because you have LLMs in the US that are for US attorneys, like tax law, right? You get an LLM in tax law if you want to be a tax practitioner. But you have this master's in law on US studies. That's usually what they call, and the schools may change the name, which is they're trying to bridge, again, the gap between, is usually civil law versus common law. Right. So they try to bridge that gap between the two. And that's what they teach you during those courses. Now, the interesting thing is that it's more, you have some classes with the JD students. You can have some electives, but they are very different from each other. And sometimes they do not cater to your selected state's requirements to take the bar exam. So as an example, the District of Columbia says, no, you just don't get an LLM. You need to go to law school, and you have to have 26 credits and an ABA accredited law school on subject matters tested on the bar exam. And once you complete those credits, you can take the bar. So that is not an LLM, but it is kind of, it isn't. Like, you're taking constitutional law, criminal law, contracts, and all these kind of things, because that's what gets tested in the bar exam, right? And then after you complete those, you do it. You have states that have no requirements at all for LLM to sit for the bar exam. You just take the bar exam. And you have some states that say, no, you need to go back to law school all over again. So it's all over the place in the US on how, and it will depend on what the state, what is the state's policies and needs, right? When you're dealing with California, New York, Florida, Texas, where they have these gigantic states that have a lot of foreign business in them, you have a greater need for these internationally trained attorneys to be able to support these companies. But if you're going to a smaller state, such as, inland, potentially like Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, that doesn't have that kind of need, you may find stricter requirements for these international lawyers to be admitted to the bar. So it's very different. You really have to focus on what you want to do, and then determine, okay, I want to live in New York, or I want to live in California, I want to live in this state. What do I need to do? But, the answer goes back to, the answer to your question goes back to what I said in the beginning. They are not all created the same. And it really behooves the attorney to do the research to figure out which one is the right fit for them.
So in a sense, a foreign trained attorney who's showing up and who's applying for a job in your city or your state, and in your sector, might actually be more focused, as opposed to sort of like spraying their resume around to every tech company, or may actually have done more legwork to get really focused, because they would have had to jump through very state specific hoops to be able to, say, get that job in New York City.
Yes. And that's what I said earlier, like applying for one and try to blend in really doesn't work. Right? The strength is in the difference. The strength is what you bring that somebody else here doesn't have. So you do find a pool of professionals that do have that level of expertise that potentially in the area that you're targeting, it's not there, right? And then they have done that work to figure out what they need to do to get admitted.
Interesting. The other thing that we wanted to talk about today is really about how you've navigated moments of career transition, including some recent ones. As you've moved from company to company throughout your career, I'm wondering if all of those moves were always planned.
No, some were
No.
planned and some were planned. When you work in house, you are really, especially if it's a small and mid-sized company, you're prone
Yeah.
to acquisitions by bigger players. And the legal department is one of the first ones to be cut, right? Because the bigger company will already have a legal department and you're probably redundant unless you have that kind of expertise that no one else has, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, after my job as a judicial clerk, so I clerked for a judge after law school, I joined a company in Pennsylvania, and very seasoned company, had been there for over 100 years. And
Mm-hmm.
within 8 months of being in there, the company was sold. Everyone was laid off, including me.
Uh-huh. Wow.
So, yeah, that was a pretty scary moment for me
Of
because I was
course.
like, wait a second. I just put all this energy to get this in-house job and I really want
Mm-hmm.
this, what I'm going to do. But you know what? You move on. You pick it up and you move on and you go. And, at every job transition that I've had, honestly, it made me stronger and braver than before. My middle sister, says that I'm the most determined and brave person that she has ever met. And I think it's because I had this goal of what I wanted to do. And I knew that there was no one else that would get me there but me. So if I let other people dictate my path to get there, I wouldn't get there. If I let these jobs, these layoffs get me down, I wouldn't get to
Yeah.
where I wanted to be. So, I could have let these things drag me down, but it actually had the opposite effect.
Mm-hmm.
So I just kept on chugging. But yeah, it did happen a few more times throughout my life. But, again, I just picked it up and moved on.
Most recently, you transitioned out of Circle. You had a great relationship with the CEO. The company's doing really well. Sort of a dream job for a lot of people. I'm curious why you decided that it was right. It was the right time to make a change.
Yeah. So when I actually left, that was kind of a long time in the making. So if I look back, it was the end of the summer of 22. And, at the end of every year, at the end of every break, I usually kind of sit down, reassess where things were. My kids were going back to school. I'm just kind of looking at things where they are for me. And it dawned on me that in early 24, I was going to turn 50.
Mm-hmm.
And, so I had a year and a half ahead of me and I didn't know what to do with that number. Like I didn't know what it meant.
Yeah.
Like I could do something with it or nothing with it, right? So what I did is I started reaching out to friends that I knew had gone through a similar transition, had achieved that kind of stage in their lives, and wanted to figure out what to do. So I was chatting with them and kind of, picking their brain. What do you think? Where am I? What are next steps? So again, trying to find mentors for me, right, on this stage of my life. And during going through that process, I started having some medical issues. I guess I love
Mm.
my job, but it didn't love me back. Didn't love
Yeah.
me back. So, after too many visits to the doctor, I decided that it was time to go.
Yeah.
So, this was late 22. So I met with my CEO in the first week of 23, and I shared with him my decision, and both he and I were in tears. Like you said, he and I
Mm-hmm.
we still have a very good relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And I cared deeply about the company, and he knew that. He knew that the decision that I was made was something that, it was really important to me and to my family. Um, you only have one body to live.
Right.
So I picked that. I picked that one.
That's a fair choice. And I think it's really amazing that you're sharing your story about stepping back from sort of like a high powered C-suite role, especially as a woman, right? I'm sure that there are other folks out there who might be struggling with something similar or, wondering what are people going to think if I take a step back. could I ever go back to that again? I think it's great that you're willing to talk publicly about that. Do you think that we need to talk about this sort of thing more?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the one thing that I learned through this process is how much people tie their personalities, identities to their job titles is incredible,
Right.
right? The one question that people kept on asking me when I was leaving Circle once the announcement was out is like, oh, where are you going to? And I said, well, I'm coming to me, I guess. I don't know. I guess that's the answer, right? But they couldn't understand that, right? They're like, wait a second, you're supposed to go somewhere else. That is the path, right? So it's very hard to detach from that identity, right? And to realize that you're more than your job
Mhm.
title. So it took me some time to disconnect fully from it. Even, my last day was June 30th of last year. And I would
Mhm.
say that I wasn't really mentally detached from it until September or October.
Hmm.
Because I had been practicing law for so long, my brain
Mhm.
was wired to be that way that when I stepped back, it kind of my body was like, wait a second, lady, what are you doing? Right. So, and just the natural response of like being on your phone 24/7,
Mhm.
that I also had to detox from. Right.
Sure.
So I now, sit in a place that is very different than it was back then, but it took time to get over that. And it's something that people think is going to be much easier than it is. You think, oh, I'm going to stop doing this and I'm going to just play, my guitar all day long.
All
Well,
right.
you're going to play your guitar for 8 hours a day, like every day, like, so those are the things that, we may dream about something until it actually comes into reality. So,
I love that phrase, like coming back to me. I mean, this is not the same thing, but I mean, I went through a layoff like 2 years ago, and I had a very similar realization about 3 months, 4 months later. You have to, so you like start, thinking about the next job, and you maybe do some consulting, and like all these things are happening, and you realize that, like, even maybe 6 months later, people will still answer your phone calls, right?
yeah.
People will still talk to you. They're not, they're not treating you as, oh, like the guy who used to work there,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
I think that it's a really important realization for people to come to, that they're
Yes.
more than whatever their job is at a particular point in time.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Circle is in a highly regulated industry. I'm wondering if that created any specific considerations for the way you went about leaving.
Oh, yes, definitely. Especially in this industry, being the general counsel of,
Mm-hmm.
with a company that is highly regulated, if you leave, the assumption is that the house is on fire, right?
Right.
So, general counsel is leaving. Oh my God, there's a big problem. And which couldn't be the furthest thing from the truth, right? This decision was fully mine on my own. So, I wanted to make sure that the board, the employees, the federal and state regulators, everyone understood that there was my single choice alone. And I wanted to
Mm-hmm.
create a path for succession that I felt comfortable with,
Mm-hmm.
that I could look back and feel proud to, right? I was leaving my team that I had
Yeah.
hired, each one of them. And I felt a duty again to ensure that I left them in good hands. So I gave my CEO during that first week of January, I said, I'm going to give you 6 months notice because that's the right thing to
Mhm.
do. We're going to go in stages about this. Um, communicated with the board, then I communicated with the
Sure.
regulators. I have phone calls with each one of them, not only federal but state regulators. And then we announced to the employees and then made the public announcement when my successor was found. So
Mm-hmm.
it really was that process to ensure that things were done in a way that provided for continuity
Mm-hmm.
of the service, and not only continuity of trust from external and internal parties in the company, right? Because what I didn't want, it was
Mm-hmm.
for that to break the trust. So as my successor onboarded, I ensured that he had the connections with the different regulators that we have, so that he could continue taking on those conversations, and just paving the way for the company to continue to succeed.
Very intentional,
Yes,
basically.
absolutely. Yes.
Since you've left, what have you been up to? I remember you told me once that you have an RV.
I do. And as people say, you don't have an RV until your third RV, but I'm a number two. So So last year we took our RV and we did some traveling in the middle of the country. We tried to hit
Mhm.
all national parks in the US. So we did that. That was super fun. And
Amazing.
yeah, and then we came back. My kids went back to school, college and high school. And then I started devoting my time to the Wyoming Stable Token Commission.
Mhm.
And then consulting through Hathaway and Kunz and, doing a couple of other things. But, what people say, what are you doing? I said, I'm not mentally or fiscally ready to retire, right? Both. So this gives me the ability to continue engage in working while I continue prioritizing my health and my
Mhm.
overall well-being. I never say never to anything because you do not know the day of tomorrow.
Mhm.
But as of this time in this podcast, I am very happy where I am, and I think that I did make the right decision for me and for my family.
I'll put you on the spot. What's your favorite national park?
Oh my God, Yellowstone.
Yellowstone? I've
Yeah.
never been. I've got to visit.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, there's the thing about Wyoming, right? But
Yeah.
it is just outstanding. It's the first national park in the US and it's
Uh-huh.
very big. And what I tell people is that it's very accessible. There are things for
Mhm.
you to do. There are so many beautiful parks, such as Glacier National Park, which is in the border of
Mhm.
Montana with Canada. But glaciers are very much backpacking, backcountry hiking park.
Sure.
So if you have small children, you may be limited in what you can do, whereby
Mhm.
Yellowstone is everything.
Yeah.
So it's just very accessible and beautiful as well. So yeah, that's my number one.
What's the best time to visit there?
I would say either in May to June or
Mhm.
August to September. It obviously
Okay.
gets very, very crowded in the summertime.
Sure.
And the weather is never really that hot in Wyoming, so you can still come. You just have to deal with the
Mhm.
crowds. In
Right.
late May, early June, and late August, early September, you still have good weather and you have
Mhm.
less people. So you have more access to do things. But I've also been there in the winter,
Uh-huh.
which is beautiful. It was very cold. It was minus 18.
Wow.
But the sun was shining. There wasn't a cloud in the sky. All I had to
Uh-huh.
do was put proper clothing on,
Yeah.
and you go in with either a snowmobile or one of those snow buses, and
Mhm.
because they don't plow the roads, just pack the snow. Because
Oh, okay,
the
interesting.
bison walk on the road in the wintertime.
Ah.
So it's very
Huh.
serene, very
Yeah.
quiet, beautiful, the sun shining through the snow. And, the geysers where they are still blowing because it's hot. So it melts the snow. So Old
Mhm.
Faithful still blows and everything. So it's just magical.
That sounds fantastic.
Yeah.
All right, I'll have to plan a trip to Yellowstone. You can give me the exact route when I
Yes.
do.
Yes, I will.
Okay, well, that was one fun question that I wasn't expecting to ask you, but I've got two more.
Yeah.
And I like to ask these questions of most of our guests. I mean, the
Yeah.
first is really, I love to read. I'm a big reader, and my list is overflowing with recommendations now from the podcast. But if there's a book or two that you might want to recommend for our audience to pick up and give a read this summer.
Well, I was going to say it's not that exciting, but the one that I most recently read that I really appreciated is called What the Best Law Teachers Do. So, one of my projects is still to teach
Uh-huh.
and talking to attorneys that have become either full time or part time professors. They're like, it appears to be a lot easier than it actually is.
Oh.
Yeah, and it's very much true. So I read this book by Michael Schwartz and Gerald Haas and Sophie Sparrow. And if
Uh-huh.
anyone in the audience is thinking about becoming a law school professor, either part time or full time, take a read. It's very
Yeah.
informative. It's just really assessing for you think this is a good thing to do. Why? And are you up for it? right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the amount of time in preparation for classes and follow-ups and student time is really demanding. So sometimes some folks start teaching, and then they just do one course and they give up because it's just too much time to be devoted to. You really must love, pedagogy and just being a professor to be able to do that. So.
We'll have to have you back on another time. Maybe do a panel of people who are law school professors or something like that. That would be fun.
Yeah.
A last question for you, and I like to ask this of all of our guests. And it's if you could look back on your days, sort of just getting started, maybe early on in Pennsylvania, trying to get that first job. What's something that you know now that you wish you'd known back then?
Is what I said earlier, and it's never enough emphasizing that my single difference is my biggest strength. I did not know that. I thought, again, that I should just blend and be vanilla, corporate counsel, like everyone else. And until I realized that that's what made me special. I didn't find my path, but I did. And you live and learn. So very happy.
This has been such a fun and different episode for me to create with you. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on, Flavia.
Of course. Yes, my pleasure. And if there's anyone in the audience that has any other questions, I'll be happy to connect and to continue empowering these foreign trained attorneys to be successful in the U.S.
Absolutely. I love your passion. And to all of our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of The Abstract. And we hope to see you next time. Thanks for tuning in today. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd recommend that you give my interview in Season 3 with Sarah Binder, General Counsel at Lime, a listen. You can also subscribe so you can get notified as soon as we post a new episode. And if you liked this one, I'd love to hear your thoughts. So please leave a rating or a comment. If you'd like to reach out to either of us, our LinkedIn profiles are in the description. See you all next week.